Greetings, it is Yashval, and I'm here with brother and dog. The dog hopefully will not play a part in today's stream, but he is here. Oh boy. Today we are hopefully finishing the game Chaos Ed. I'm ready to be done with it.
So we're in for a really disturbing experience. The last time, the one I did this on my own, it took about 3 hours. It may take 3 hours now, or we may have already cut out most of that time that I spent doing it, because we got to the ending this week. So this could be a short stream, or we could be in for a couple hours. We don't know.
For this specific game, I intend to keep going after this game. So,
but this game in particular for Chaos Head. But yeah, buckle in. It's gonna be a ride. Yeah, starting right in.
I'm gonna eat ice cream.
The Shinsen station of the Inokashira line was one stop away from Shibuya, a station it would take hardly 1 minute to arrive at via train. The station itself was completely underground, being located in a tunnel, and the only outside light that reached it was a faint amount coming in through the outdoor exit area at the end of the platform. Now, due to the earthquake, all the light fixtures had gone off, and it was terribly dim, much more so than usual. Aoi Sena stepped out onto the platform, carrying Orihara Kozue on her back. There had been no need for her to buy a ticket. She didn't spot any station workers anywhere, and the ticket machines were out of service too. When she looked at the tracks, the rails there were visibly warped. Naturally, the trains had been at a standstill since yesterday. Kozue's breathing began to sound painful from time to time, but she wasn't conscious. There was dried blood plastered to her forehead. During the earthquake, she had been caught among the collapsing buildings and hadn't woken since. Gigglomaniacs couldn't use their power to heal their own wounds. Pain compelled them to be reminded of the reality of their injuries. Already we're seeing something different, because last time she was fully conscious, she just had a bloody foot. Bloody ankle. So, things are already different. They couldn't create local shared recognition to the effect of, I'm not wounded. They couldn't make it be as if nothing had happened. Their human instincts wouldn't permit it. Which is to say nothing of the fact that one couldn't construct local shared recognition when the other person was unconscious. Sena could now do nothing to help Kozue. Upon reaching the depopulated platform, Sena lowered Kozue from her back and leaned her gently up against the wall. Her expression was harsh. She gave the lowered Kozue only a single glance, then soon shifted her gaze back to the station premises. And, glaring at a certain fixed point, she ground her teeth together. At the end of her line of sight, 2 human figures stood lined up at the back of the dim platform.
This is also a change.
This is also different.
That guy was not here this last time.
One was a tall man wearing a high-quality suit. From head to toe, he gave off an aura of refinement. He had excellent posture, and a relaxed smile played about his lips. The other was a homeless man, clad in filthy clothing. His hair was overly long, and his face had been left unshaven. Since he had his head lowered, it is impossible to be certain of his expression. The 2 of them had overly contrasting appearances. All they did was stand quietly in this dark station platform where there were no other people. To Sena, both of them were objects of hatred. Neuroskenichi and Hatano Issei. Even if she wanted to forget them, she wouldn't have been able to. In the past, her mother and little sister had met with a gruesome end before her eyes, and these people themselves were the culprits who had killed Sena's family. The homeless man, Hatano, murmured desolately, his head hanging.
あの実験を止めようとした。だが、私一人では動き出した歯車は止められなかった。この男が。
Hatano took a darting glance at Norose's countenance. Norose said nothing. His attitude of being utterly at ease remained impeccable.
この男が実験の継続を指示した。私はあの結果を 望んではいなかった。悪いのはこの男、ノロセなんだ。
Also difference.
分かっ
Yeah,
て
they're
く
actually
れ、
talking.
セナ。
Senna felt revolted as she listened to his words of repentance.
お前は母さんと妹を見殺しにした。それが厳然とした事実だ。悔いているならどうして逃げた？
世界を守るためだ。
でたらめを。
親に逆らうのは感心しませんね。
There, for the first time, Naruse spoke.
確かに君の家族が悲劇的な結末を迎えたのは私が指示した結果です。もう十分データは取れていたのでね。実に有意義な実験でした。
有意義？
She swiftly rebooted the D-sword in her hand. The shockwave from it stirred her long, dark hair.
この男を殺せ、セナ。こいつが元凶だ。
言われなくても。
Senna had already leapt powerfully from the platform floor. She closed the distance without brandishing her sword, a wondrous demonstration of springing into motion from a standstill. Her target was Naruse Genichi. She mowed him down with her D-sword, slicing apart even the air. His head went flying. Senna followed it with her eyes. Naruse's soaring head abruptly warped mid-air. She watched it transform into her own father's face. Shocked, she looked at the headless body before her. It had been wearing a suit a second before, but now it was in a homeless person's tattered clothes. Powerless, it went toppling over backward. Eyes wide, Senna moved her gaze to Hitano, who had been standing beside it. He in turn faced her as well. His bearded mouth had on a mocking smile. His face contorted as though a mosaic had been laid over it, his body contorted too. The next instant, Hitano had assumed the face of a man Senna didn't know. In age, countenance, and demeanor, he was a completely different person from her father. Senna was bewildered. She took another scrutinizing look at the head she had just decapitated. After tracing an arc and following, it had splattered blood on the floor. It was her father's face, her father's head. Senna couldn't tear her eyes away from it. Bewitchment brought about by a delusion. As she came to that realization, Senna's breathing went fast and shallow.
セナちゃんさ、
The man who was previously supposed to have been her father, who was now a separate person, called Senna's name in an intimate tone.
君が今やったことって結局お父さんと同じっすよね。
Middle finger to you, sir. It was the result she'd longed for these past 6 months. It should have been. Despite that, Senna was assaulted by uncertainty. Her father, now only ahead, had his eyes turned in Senna's direction.
父親の首跳ねて殺すってえぐいな。
と。
A big middle finger to Yasua. Big giant middle finger. Why was she experiencing this much psychological shock? Still not understanding the reason behind it, Senna heard the sound of something tearing apart with a snap deep in her ears. I heard a voice. It was a scream in Senna's heart. Upon hearing that cry, which resembled madness and seemed to curse reality, I came running to Shinsen Station. But by then it was already too late. When I entered the dim premises, the faint smell of blood hovered in the air. Kozuki was lying down by the wall unconscious. On the platform, there was Senna's form, sunken down, her back facing me. Her head was lowered, making her long hair cover her face, keeping me from seeing her expression. Next to her was a headless body. The round object lying fallen a short distance away was the head that had once been connected to the corpse, I realized. Atano-san. Becoming aware that it was him, I bit my lip.
こいつはラッキーっすね。
A lone man stood on the tracks. Though he was in a suit, he also wore a rucksack, and from within it reverberated a nasty mechanical noise. Suo Mamoru, a detective in the investigative department at police headquarters. I had met this man before, and I knew what this man had done.
もともとは目障りな畑の親子を処分しに来たんすけどね。西条くん、 君が自分から火に飛び込んできてくれて感謝感激っす。君を見かけたら捕まえろってことになってるんすよ。
誰に？
The Church of the Divine Light. A flippant smile. That way of smiling brought his late partner, Detective Bond, to mind. But there was a decisive difference between them. Detective Bond's smile had been a performance, meant to set the other person off guard or else irritate them. When it came to Suwa, on the other hand, this sly smile itself was his true nature.
あんたはノロセの居場所を知ってる？
西条くんさ。
Suwa shook his head exaggeratedly and let out a sigh.
口の聞き方に気をつけてほしいっすね。
You're also a murderer in a basket, so I don't really give a shit.
Yep. Without taking my eyes off Suwa, I cautiously jumped from the platform down to the tracks. It had in depth so that I was shielding the motionless Senna with my
ア
back.
ンっていう人を殺したのはあんただ。
だから
刑事のくせに人を殺すなんて。
君には言われたくないっす。
I clenched my D-sword tightly.
あんたみたいなやつに敬語を使う義理なんてないよ。
Yeah, go Nishijo.
あのさ、お前に言われたくねえって言ってるんだよ。
I could tell clearly, even from this distance, the smile had disappeared from Sua's face.
お前も人殺しだろ。違うとは言わせないぞ。お前は葉月志乃を殺した。俺は今すぐにでもお前をぶち殺したいんだ。
That was the nurse lady, right?
Yes.
She killed
Good.
herself, didn't she?
She wouldn't have killed herself if he didn't expose her. Azuki Shino, the nurse who had been the true New-Gen criminal. The two of them were fellow disciples of the Cosmic Church of the Divine Light. Was that all there was to it? I gulped down a breath.
信仰の救いのためにそれは自制するが、その代わり俺が責任持って心を殺してやる。
I immediately started to brandish my D-sword. Nothing was going to come off of brandishing it, though. I'd simply done it on reflex, and just as expected, it didn't make any difference. All of a sudden, an astoundingly powerful wind blew at me. Pushed back by it, I almost fell over, so I desperately braced myself. But my body didn't go through with it. Instead, I curled up in a ball on the spot. I couldn't control my own body. It moved by itself, like it didn't belong to me. Before I knew it, my surroundings had gone dark. Below me was a nighttime vista that one might easily mistake for a field of stars. I came to the realization that I was standing somewhere incredibly high up. Beside me were 4 guys and girls I'd never met. No, I'd seen one of them before. Yua. For some reason, she wasn't wearing her glasses. No, not Yua. She was Mia, Yua's younger twin sister, who should have died a month ago. In other words, this was the roof of Cornelius Tower. And my body wasn't my own. I was wearing an unfamiliar school uniform. Even my stature was more brawny. To begin with, I could guess who I was based on the fact that there was only 4 other guys and girls near me, crumpled down, petrified, and wailing and crying. This body into which my consciousness had climbed. It belonged to one of the 5 victims who had died in the first New-Gen case, the group dive. Without my will having any bearing on it, my field of sight slowly moved. It slid to the side. I turned back toward the heliport. Shogun, who had filmed that video, must be there. Shogun wore a Darth Spider helmet on his head and a black cloak over his body. The Shogun who had cornered me at Ofront had put on a similar getup. Was he really Shogun? No. No matter how I looked at it, his legs, sticking out slightly from beneath the black cloak, were clad in slacks. On top of that, they were as thick as those of a regular adult male. They weren't the skinny, pitiful legs of Shogun, of Nishijo Takumi, whose bones protruded visibly. Looking more closely, even his seated height was totally different. The cloak kept them hidden, but his shoulders also appeared fairly broad. At the very least, he wasn't Nishijo Takumi. Nor was he carrying a video camera. Moreover, From the darkness spreading out at the fake Shogun's back, I heard dragging footsteps. Not just one set of them. It wasn't a hallucination. These peculiar footsteps belonged to many, many people. It meant that several dozen somethings were lurking beyond the darkness. These footsteps hadn't been a part of the video uploaded on YouTube. Besides, there was no way such a large number of people could have accessed the heliport. What the hell was the source of this sound? The four others next to me screamed and wept in lamentation. Disregarding my will, my body too let out a cry and began shaking. Foo foo foo. Something was approaching. If we were in a cheap horror movie, these scraping footsteps would turn out to be from zombies. Zombies, their rotting bodies swaying slowly as they walked, both their hands extending limply in front of them. But that was only what happened in movies. A mob of zombies couldn't possibly show up in reality. Much less in a 21st century Tokyo.
Actually, it'd be most likely to show up in 21st century Tokyo.
So what about it? My chest seemed about to cave in with fear. I wanted to look away, but the owner of the body I'd entered wasn't diverting his eyes. At last, those unknown beings began to emerge from the darkness. They flooded the heliport, sealing off our escape route. I didn't know whether to describe this as getting the wind knocked out of my sails. What appeared were perfectly ordinary people. They wore suits, student uniforms, parkas. There were different ages and genders, but all of them were the sort of people you'd normally see walking around Shibuya at night. If you overlooked a single point, out of the nearly 100 people there, every one of them was holding a bladed weapon. None of them said a word. They simply wove a dissonant melody, made up of the mingling of their numerous wild, nasal breaths. For some reason, I couldn't see their expressions too well. It was like all of their faces are made of paint blurred by water. Their faces were vague, disintegrating. Were their faces truly deformed, or else had my sight, watching them, gone off kilter? I couldn't tell. With lethargic but certain steps, they were coming our way, like robots ordered onward by a single program. I thought maybe the fake Shogun was giving them orders, but he didn't appear to be doing so. Once in a while, he moved his wheelchair forward a tiny bit, and afterwards, he didn't budge an inch. The 5 young people being driven back had nowhere to run. In order to escape from this incredibly high place, 180 meters above the ground, holding their blades, the crowd approached. Little by little, bit by bit. They'd already closed the distance to the point, still silent even at the final stage, drawing near us without attempting to leap upon us all at once. The horde moved about bizarrely, and as a result, it seemed far more dreadful. Enough to make me think I wanted to get out of here right away. Even if it meant jumping off.
その目誰の目
The voice I heard unexpectedly is that of the real Shogun, Nishida Takumi. But I heard it not from the direction of the Shogun, wearing a Darth Spider helmet, but rather from straight overhead. Apparently I hadn't been the only one to hear it. The 5 of us who were being hunted down stood up as if we'd received our cue, joined hands with each other, and looked up at the night sky. Naturally, all that spread out there was a starscape. I didn't see Shogun anywhere. He'd been looking in on our thoughts.
その目誰の
My field of sight slowly panned across, and mysteriously enough, although the night scenery of Shibuya ought to have been spread out below me, a long flight of stairs stretched out there. It went right to the roof of the building standing close beside Cornelius Tower. The adjacent building, not Sign City, which was on the other side of the Shuto Expressway. The building standing close beside Cornelius Tower. Despite the fact that nothing of the sort existed in reality, even so, the 5 of them harbored absolutely no doubts about those stairs possibly being illusionary. And with a sense of salvation, their emotions were conveyed to me as well. They stepped forward, holding each other's hands, is exactly how the group dive incident had concluded. They hadn't taken the dive because they wanted to. When the stairs, which they had utterly convinced themselves were there, turned out to not exist, and the sensation of beginning to fall shocked them, they shrieked from the bottom of their hearts. We were falling. A horrendous wind pressure lashed at my body. The girl next to me, holding my hand, screamed in a voice like a beast howling. She clutched my hand so hard, her nails dug in. The amount of time it took us to plummet 180 meters felt like an eternity. The dark earth rushed up with breathtaking force. Since the area around us was also dark, I came close to lapsing into a hallucination, and being sucked down endlessly into the middle of darkness. And then, all five slammed into the ground, were crushed with a crunching sound. The pain of it grabbed hold of me without expecting it, that single blow leading straight to death. Its impact made it seem like my entire body had exploded and been ground down to a fine powder from the inside out. I experienced the sensation of my heart contracting violently from the shock of it. My consciousness cut off there. My eyes were coercively made to open, and scenery flew into my vision without my consent. I was walking along Tamagawa Street. My body was completely intact. Even though the previous sensation of colliding with the ground lingered distinctly within me, I was walking normally down the street. Not that what I had willed had anything to do with it. This body too is sturdier than mine. This wasn't me either. I had a nasty premonition.
Pregnant man.
Suddenly there was a strange man walking toward me. When I saw him, I was forced to acknowledge that my hunch had been right on the money. The man I passed was clothed in a suit, but for some reason he wore a Darth Spider helmet on his head. The image he made was too surreal. There were no other passerby. I wanted to flee from here this very second. Despite that, the owner of the body my consciousness had come into turned back toward the Darth Spider man I just passed. Darth Spider was standing right behind me, so close it seemed like I could feel his breath. Coming from my blind spot, he socked me in the stomach. All the tension dropped out of my body and my vision went pitch black. After some time, I felt a searing pain in my abdomen. Well, wasn't expecting that.
Thought you got the good water, huh?
I knew darn well which one I grabbed. It's just you don't expect it to be.
You want some cocoa?
Definitely not. Definitely not. When my field of sight opened up again, I was in an operating room. Before me stood Hazuki Shino, her nurse's whites open, her stomach bloody. Though she was deathly pale, she gave me a kindly smile. In her hand was a scalpel. She slowly laid it against my belly. Hazuki's hand pressed down, a rift appeared in my skin. Blood sprayed out from the wound, catching on Hazuki Shino's face. Even then, her smile remained pasted on. I watched, overwhelmed by dread and pain, as she gradually slashed me open. I had viewed the spectacle once before when I read Hazuki's memories. In short, this was the pregnant man incident. Pain in my stomach was becoming unbearable. Screaming and crying, I tried to somehow escape by squirming, but my limbs were tied down to the bed, and I couldn't move away. Shaking myself made the pain in my abdomen grow still more intense.
信仰の救いをあなたに
My skin, cleanly sliced apart by her scalpel, Hazuki's fingers probed the opening from which the blood overflowed. That stimulation alone stabbed me with enough agony to shatter my brain. Oh, the sounds! Her fingers writhed inside me, and the feeling of them came through to me clearly. And just as I had seen them before in her memories, Hazuki forced my wound to open up on both sides. The sensation of skin and flesh ripping. Taking it straight on, sans anesthesia. I, and the possessor of the body into which I'd entered, lost consciousness. Then soon woke again from an excess of pain. The Hazuki went on making the wound widen impossibly. I'd long since stopped caring about little details, like which part of me hurt, about where in my body the pain was erupting from. I had the illusion that all of my nerve endings were being pierced through with burning needles. one by one. And I passed out again. But I couldn't escape. Pain mercilessly forced my consciousness awake. My body convulsed. If it meant being released from this suffering, I thought it'd be fine with biting my tongue off. Next, Hazuki picked up a bloody fetus. It made her smile appear conversely revolting. This woman was insane. She took the remnants of the fetus she'd removed from her own body and plunged it into the depths of my stomach. Her hand and the fetus she held there shoved aside my innards, boring into me, gnawing deeper and deeper. I started to vomit blood and it got caught in my throat. And even while I seemed about to suffocate from it, I went on emitting wheezing screams. Maybe because the pain had made my brain release too many neurotransmitters. My head felt weirdly vague and the pain still didn't ease up. And I began to understand less and less of what was happening.
Why'd you force me to do this ending?
Pain was all that controlled me. Husky withdrew her hand from my stomach and nodded with satisfaction. She said softly as if she were dealing with a patient, then abruptly fainted and collapsed in place. At almost the exact same time, somebody entered the operating room. The sound of his shoes rang out. But I had no interest in whoever it was, and went on bawling and shrieking, exposed to nothing other than excruciating anguish. Seeing the unnatural swelling in my abdomen, I panicked. Together with the pain, I had begun feeling a kind of itchiness. It itched so bad. I wanted to scratch at the wound. But my hands were bound to the bed and I couldn't do it. Suddenly, a shadow fell across my sight. Darth Spider had appeared, looming in front of me. He picked Hazuki up in his arms and left the operating room. Then, after some time, returned by himself. I didn't know what he was thinking. But he had a sewing needle and some fishing line with him. And he began ponderously stitching together the opening of my wound. At this point, the pain it caused was absolutely nothing compared to the pain of having a foreign object pushed into my body. And the pain of my flesh tearing apart. Darth Spider's suturing was incredibly sloppy. An elementary schooler could have done a better job. When he pulled at the fishing line, it chafed against the holes he'd made in my skin. The wound grew more itchy. An unbearable itchiness. An itchiness that seemed to seethe up from inside me. Itchy. 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 I wanted to scratch it. If you let me, I'd be happy to die. A throbbing itch insinuated its way into my pain. The itchiness, more so than the pain, is driving me out of my mind. See Because of my mental state, it took me a while to notice that the scenery had switched at some point. The ache and the itchiness subsided minutely, but it didn't mean they had gone away completely. Now, even as I walked through the neighborhood of Shinsen, itchiness in the depth of my body, and the sensation of something foreign in my abdomen, and a pain like having a fine needle plunging in and out all over my body, they stayed behind in me as markedly as a tumor, continuing to psychologically torment me. A dark road with few people on it, located away from the heart of the city. As I walked down it, I spotted a human figure coming my way. Since the road was narrow, we would have to angle ourselves sideways to pass one another. But I went cold when I saw the appearance of the figure walking toward me. It was that Darth Spider man again. We crossed paths. Darth Spider displayed no particular reaction. My heart went into a tumult. An emotion resembling obsession rose at the back of my brain. A nasty old a-hole who'd been hitting on my woman. It pissed me off. I wanted to kill him. That feeling, truly coming out of left field, drove me into motion. The face of my woman was vague in my memory. I couldn't recall her clearly. It was doubtful that she even existed in the first place. Despite that, the face of the nasty old a-hole who'd been hitting on my woman appeared vividly at the back of my mind. I'd seen that face before. He was the victim of the staking incident. My memory leapt ahead, and I was in a familiar dark, narrow alleyway. It was the scene of the staking. In front of my eyes was the victim who died there. I was tightly clenching the aging man's neck. His body convulsed violently, and bubbles frothed from his mouth, and his eyes rolled back in his head. I went faintly cold, tasting the sensation of someone's life disappearing in my own hands. At last, the man's body stopped moving. After confirming this, I, Komieda, who had carried out the actual homicide in this case, I took my hands off his neck, kicked his fallen corpse once in the side, and began to make my departure.
Who did it?
Komieda.
I don't know who that
The guy
is.
who they tried to arrest, or they arrested saying he was the Nugent killer. Because his DNA was at the scene of this crime.
But, so he only did one of them.
Yeah. But he was mind controlled by Sua. Hearing a voice, I turned around to look, and the man who should have died had risen, the whites of his eyes showing. His hands reached out for me. With a shriek, I punched him down. But those movements themselves were sluggish. He kept rising without fail. I seized his neck again. In the same ways before, more powerfully than before. Putting my whole body and spirit into it. I strangled him as hard as I could. With enough strength to snap the bones in his neck. He soon stopped moving again. This time, I put my ear to his mouth, making sure he wasn't breathing. Then let go of him. For some time, I watched over him. And then, for some reason, the man who should have been dead jerked again, his body quivering, and began to get up. His expression itself remained absolutely unchanged. He had the face of the one who is dead. Yet he rose and approached me. As I started to retreat, terrified, my foot trod on something. When I looked down at my foot with a start, a huge number of cross-shaped stakes were scattered across the roadway. A phrase from one of Phantasm's songs played at the back of my brain. Strike the stake, strike the stake. I had to drive a stake into the monster in front of me, and stop him from moving. If not, I'd be screwed. Controlled by that sense of danger, I hurled the rising man back against the wall, and picked up a stake. I didn't know when it had happened, but my other hand was already holding a hammer. Alright, so you're just playing with him now, come on. My consciousness returned to the operating room, but I wasn't the pregnant man.
No brain.
Although the pain from it and the sensation of an object in my
Wait, no,
stomach
this
kept on
would
torturing
be-
my nerves to their very limit.
This would be the no blood one, right? No brain
There were
was
two
last,
human
right?
forms in my field of sight. They watched me steadily with bated breath. One was Darth Spider. The other was Hazuki Shino. Her uniform wasn't stained by blood now, and so I soon figured out that this wasn't the pregnant man incident, but instead something taking place at a different time. I'd been made to lie in bed. The needle for an IV drip was stuck in my arm. But it wasn't as if anything were flowing into me. The liquid pouring down the IV tube was flowing backwards. Blood. My blood. The blood circulating within this body was flowing out through the IV needle. A terribly grungy-looking bucket was the only thing at the end of the tube. Blood filled it to the brim. Into it fell one drop, then another drop, of the blood dripping from the tube. My head went blank. I was outstandingly dizzy. That pleasant feeling, like my consciousness is about to go off into the distance, mingled with the ongoing pain left behind in me from the pregnant man. I was overcome by an amazingly peculiar sensation. As if they were showing off to me, Darth Spider and Hazuki Shino embraced each other gently, like lovers, supporting one another. Hazuki had a blissful look on her face. I couldn't comprehend how she could make a face like that. Right in the middle of creating the desiccated corpse from the vampire case. But before I could think about why I had trouble understanding it, the pain turned severe. My throat became incredibly dry and my sight steadily went dark. And finally my consciousness began slowly clouding. I realized that this was a vicarious experience. I was being forced to vicariously experience a sequence of New Gen murders. The pain and fear from each one of them. I was being forced to taste it. If so, then there were still 3 remaining, becoming aware that I had despaired.
先生
Someone addressed me and I came back to myself. I should have been in the operating room, but I was standing in the hospital corridor.
高階先生
Still without any connection to my will, my body turned to face toward behind me. There was Hazuki Shino, wearing a somewhat melancholy expression.
折り入ってご相談があるんですが
Is her hair supposed to be greenish or is it supposed to be black?
Green.
ここだと人目につきますからこっちに
She said apologetically, then entered an examining room. I shouted, "Don't go," in my heart, but of course my voice didn't reach him. Since my current time was outside treatment hours, there was nobody in the examining room. Hazuki continued toward the back. I, Dr. Takashina, followed her without harboring any suspicions whatsoever. She came to an abrupt stop. Just as I wondered what she was doing, a man with something black on his head sprang out from the shadows. While I stood there in startlement, he pushed something like gauze over my mouth. I then lost consciousness. What do you call that stuff? Chlorine. A huge noise rang in my ears. My skull was vibrating ferociously. The sounds, man. It wasn't just vibrating, it was being whittled away.
Chloroform.
Chloroform, yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
You got chloroformed. It wasn't just vibrating, it was being whittled away. I felt that sensation distinctly. The sound died down, and when I opened my eyes, I was back in an operating room. A number of lights, like a gathering of eyes, hung down from the ceiling. Shining brilliantly, they illuminated my face.
頭蓋骨が外れましたよ先生まあ先生の硬膜とても綺麗だわ
God, this
Hazuki said in a tone of rhapsody, then used a pair of scissors to cut away the tough membrane covering my brain. Feeling it directly as it happened, I was entrapped in an impatient, sickened frame of mind. Dr. Takashina, hadn't known that Hazuki was capable of performing surgery, not to mention open brain surgery. That was why astonishment came first, followed by my noticing that anesthesia kept my body from moving. Hazuki wasn't the only one in the operating room. The man with the black thing on his head, Darth Spider, was there too. He stood there, immobile, without saying a word.
人は脳死状態でも人工呼吸器なしで1週間以上生きたっていう事例があるんです。ご存知ですか？
Smiling gently, Hazuki murmured something strange by my ear.
それってつまり脳がなくてもしばらくは生きていられるっていうことですよね。
No!
先生はどれくらい生きられるかしら？
I shuddered. An unknown terror roiled within me. Hazuki held up a spoon before my eyes. The spoon soon left my field of sight.
高階先生に信仰の救いあれ。
You, madam, are certifiably fucking insane.
Yeah. Absolutely insane. The feeling of something that didn't belong there pushed hard into my head. I say in my head, but I don't mean that metaphorically. It's literally inside my head.
I examine.
The sense of something entering and moving around in there. There's no pain. Even so, it was more than enough to repulse me and terrify me. Hazuki shook something like a lump of gel down on a tray set near me. I glanced to see what it was, moving my eyes alone. A clean pinkish hue, but its shape was smashed, almost like salmon roe. Once I understood it was part of my own brain, my dread reached the melting point. I begged her to stop. Hazuki's hand didn't stop moving. On the contrary, her expression shifted to one of ecstasy, and her cheeks flushed as she recklessly dug deeper. Into Dr. Takashina's brain. Suddenly I was having so much fun I wanted to burst out laughing. Suddenly I was filled with a horrible hatred. Suddenly I felt blissful. Suddenly a fierce lust surged up in me and my chest tightened ardently. She stirred my brain around, simultaneously stirring around my emotions. Emotions different from what I actually felt welled up in me. They dwelt separately from my heart, my soul, the consciousness known as me,
This
thrusting
one's
at
the
me.
last one then?
No. The ambiguity of my own existence. Is the next one, yes. Not the last
What's the last one?
one. DQN puzzle. There's another one after. This one's the Hungry Arm one. There's DQN puzzle after this, though. They dwell separately from my heart, my soul, consciousness knows me, thrusting at me, the ambiguity of my own existence. As my psyche went to shreds via this mental rape, which would ultimately lead to the denial of my existence, I found myself walking under a railroad overpass. Taking the order into consideration, this time it would be the delicious hand. As expected, my body had become female. I was awfully hungry. Maybe the victim had been on a diet or something. I crossed paths as the Darth Spider-Man again. He appeared and disappeared when I least expected. Given how much his appearance made him stand out, why hadn't the police or the media picked up any information about him? Darth Spider spoke for the first time. He pointed at my right hand as he said it, a surreal spectacle. I, who had been walking along quickly, stopped and took a look at my right hand. For some reason, it was holding 5 unwrapped skewers of chicken. Each skewer was sticking out from between the fingers of my closed fists. Warm-looking steam. The juicy scent of cooked meat. It stimulated my appetite. My mouth watered. Unable to take it for another second, I bit in. An intense pain bolted through my fingers, but I didn't stop chewing. It was the first time I'd ever eaten such delicious skewered chicken. Lots of juice poured out of the meat, splashing to the ground. Delicious, so delicious I thought I'd die. I polished off the 5 chicken skewers in the blink of an eye. Without my noticing it, Darth Spider had disappeared. But I didn't give a dang about such a weird guy. I wanted to eat more. My stomach sought more food. The fingers in my right hand throbbed with pain, but my appetite far surpassed it. I looked back at my hand. I hadn't just been holding skewered chicken. I was cradling an arm-sized hunk of bone with meat attached to it. Its dripping juices stained the sleeve of my blouse, turning it reddish black. When had I obtained it, and how long had I been carrying it? That too stopped mattering in the face of my hunger. I sank my teeth into the meat with all my might. Excruciating pain. I tore it apart with my teeth. I masticated it, tasted it. I swallowed it. It was a soft and fairly fatty meat. I bit further into it. Both my hand and the area around my mouth had gone slick with lard, but I didn't let it bother me. This is a deliciousness I'd never experienced before. I bit the meat off the bone, Fat spread in my mouth, seeping in like it was melting, leaving behind a unique aftertaste. It hurt. For some reason it hurt so bad I thought I'd die. But I kept chewing. Compared to the size of the bone, there wasn't very much of the meat itself. I'd soon devoured all of it. At the end, I licked up the thin scraps of flesh, just barely clinging to the bone. Savoring even the bone's taste, almost sucking it. The 5 thin bones protruding at the end of it weren't so hard that they wouldn't break if I bit them. Gave them a good gnawing. Pain so intense I almost crumpled in place ran through me. And with tears streaming down my face, I lapped up the juice seeping pleasantly out from within the bones. I ripped one of the bones off, and while collapsing in place, from how the stimulation of it seared me, I rolled it around in my mouth. Crunch, 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 crunch. When I swallowed it got trapped in my throat and I couldn't breathe. I unconsciously began to swing my legs around, kicking out wildly. But without my taking heed of it, the cord had been wound around my ankles and I couldn't move freely. Darth Spider stood before me. As I writhed, the exposed bones in my right hand struck to the ground. The vibrations from it sent pain spreading throughout my whole body, like waves on water. I pissed myself and passed out as I suffocated, and never woke up again. Great thing to play while you're eating.
You wonder why I don't want to play games that you fucking suggest. This isn't enjoyable for me. This isn't entertaining for me. I don't like it. I haven't liked basically this entire game.
I opened my eyes in a dim alley. The backdrop was a little different from before. As I walked, I leaned on the shoulder of a thuggish guy with his face pummeled to a pulp, looking like he was about to cry. The 3 of them were in an awful state, myself included. Their clothes were drenched in blood, and their faces had puffed up, and they were chipped a number of teeth. The one who had done this was probably me. They were the trio of thugs who'd picked a fight with me. After this, they would have their torsos torn apart and would die. Again, the Darth Spider man stood at the end of their path. The guy who was lending me his shoulder yelled at Darth Spider, but with his face looking the way it was, his intimidation factor pretty much dropped by half. One of them seized the Darth Spider. Grabbing him by the collar, he heaved him up and smacked the black helmet. He forced the helmet to come off. I'd had an idea of whose face would appear behind it, and it really was Domaru's fearless face. He was Hazuki Shino's accomplice, so he'd been the other New Gen criminal. Suo rammed a knee into the belly of the guy who was making a grab for him. The polish evident in how he carried himself set him utterly apart from the thugs and their violence. The ground shook slightly. I felt the presence at Suo's back, immersed in darkness deep in the narrow alley. Something was there. Moreover, it prompted me to imagine it as being of abnormal size. In addition, it let out an uncanny growl. Though we couldn't see it, the vivid bloodlust emitted by that monster made all 3 of our hearts wither utterly. At last it showed itself, a literal monster, together with footsteps that sound like the ground rumbling. So grotesque and nothing else like it existed anywhere on Earth. Its brown skin glistened wetly, and its colossal head sat low upon its shoulders. Its red eyes glinted fiercely, and its mouth was torn wide across its face on either side, and its wrists were as thick around as logs. That bipedal monster came up to Sua's side, then opened its mouth all the way. Its rows of sharp fangs shone, reflecting the light of the street lamp. Its roar was as low as a growl, and put greater fear in me than any beast I'd heard before in my life. It had the ferocity to make those who heard it quiver down to their very souls.
なんだこれ。
スパークオーズが好きなんすよ。
Sua alone appeared completely unbothered by this monster's appearance. On the contrary, he touched the monster's leg with apparent satisfaction, stroking it.
それに出てくるエイリアンス。
It's a Rancor. Copy.
A second roar, and the monster pressed a step closer to the stock-still trio. I tried to run. There was no way I could escape. I tried to call for help. There was no one in the area. An overwhelming power discrepancy. The difference in our latent potential as a species was much too great. With the beast before us, we three were all too helpless. For the first time in our lives, we experienced heartfelt fear. When people end up like that, they fall silent, shrink back, and become unable to move so much as a single finger. The monster let out one breath, and it swung down its log-like arms. In an instant, their two bodies had been torn apart as if they were dolls. Blood and intestines splattered across the street, steaming, and it hurled their divided corpses viciously, spearing them on the handles attached to a telephone pole, dangling them down.
あとは君だけっすよ。
Sua's gaze penetrated me. I awoke to the fact that he was the one setting this alien to work. I told myself this was a delusion, but it didn't do any good. Faced with absolute terror and overwhelming violence, I just sank down and pissed myself. Afterward, it was all I could do to look dazedly up at that monstrosity. And my torso ripped apart, and as I got a taste of this killing method that regular people would never ever experience, I breathed my last. Well, I'm glad Sue is enjoying all this.
The only one that really bothered me was eating the hand. Specifically.
How many times have I vicariously died right now? 3 times? 1 time? 7 times? 4 times? 2 times? 5 times? Human flesh is pretty dang tasty.
Shut up.
It hurts. No more. Dark Spider's get-up is surreal, a gag. Well, how many times have I died? Are you saying died? I'm not dead. That monster is like straight out of a horror movie. But Sue said the monster came from Spark Wars. Yeah, what about it? Human flesh is pretty dang tasty. Bones, too. Why does Dark Spider wear black? Hazuki Shino is hot stuff, but she's scary. She's crazy. That's what makes her a hottie. If Dark Spider's made of bones, what's his meat? How many times have I died for a gag? Wait, is it a gag or what? Not passed away. Died. Death. 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 It's surreal. No more. Look, bones. I don't want to die. Black. I died. So kill me. Inside the rucksack Sua wore on his back, his port played a strange mechanical sound. As for Sua, he had long since grown completely accustomed to hearing it. It was precisely because he had this sound that he'd been able to murder the heart of Nishido Takumi, the gigalomaniac. He uplifted an internal prayer of thanks to God for it. Sua would never forgive Nishido Takumi. He dared to drive Hazuki to suicide. Hazuki, Sua's childhood friend, whom he'd lived with constantly ever since he was born. In the back of his head, Sua recalled what she had told him several years ago, at the time when he decided to aspire to be a police detective, she to be a nurse.
私、守の子供を産みたい。
Both of their respected parents were followers of the Cosmic Church of the Divine Light, and God and the great founder had been there for them since birth. Suwa and Hazuki were raised together as children of the whole sect. It had also been the great founder's will that they bind themselves to one another. And so, the two of them obeyed their sect's teaching, to the point of offering up the life of the child residing in Hazuki's belly. Even now that Hazuki had reached martyrdom, he was convinced they had done the right thing all along. The 7 incidents, commonly known as New Gen Madness, Suwa and Hazuki had caused them together. Although midway through he'd gotten pretty panicked when his senior, Yusuji Ban, pointed out the contradictions in the group dive video. The video Suwa uploaded to YouTube had been recorded by projecting his memories, but since some time had passed since the incident, parts of his memory of it had grown ambiguous. He didn't recall the exact details of the scenery, but since the video wouldn't seem very real without that sort of thing, he'd gone out of his way to look at the photos hanging in the lobby of Cornelius Tower. As a result, the video had become more realistic, but he picked up the wrong picture to work from. He certainly hadn't guessed that something would look so strikingly different between the tower's completion and the present. Then again, that too had been suppressed, thanks to the great founder's influence. Suwa would have issues with anyone who underestimated the power of the man who had founded the Cosmic Church of the Divine Light. He had governmental connections, and he even slipped several believers into the management at police headquarters. No matter how much the likes of Ban howled, it was only natural that he hadn't been able to do a thing about it. Suwa's occupation as a detective, Hazuki's occupation as a nurse. The support of the pressure the great founder put on the police and the media. The NOAA system, terminals provided by Nozomi Technology. Making full use of these things while Suwa and Hazuki had focused solely and intently on killing. As for the reason they'd gone to such lengths to keep killing people, all of it was for the sake of pushing Nichijou Takumi to his psychological limit. After they forced him to awaken as a gigalomaniac, they would kidnap him and harvest his code sample. Alternatively, by cornering Nichijou Takumi, who had been created from delusions, they would lure out the real Nichijou Takumi, capture him, and harvest his code sample. Real or a copy, it didn't matter, as long as he was Nichijou Takumi. Which is why Suwa had posed as Nichijou Takumi using a wheelchair. It was a divine mandate that had been passed down to Suwa and Hazuki, and something they had to accomplish no matter what sacrifices were deemed to them in the process. And now, despite losing Hazuki, he had already overcome the tribulations set by God. Recollecting the face of the woman who had once loved him, and whom he had loved in return, Suwa clenched his back teeth together as though withstanding grief. And next he walked up to Nichijou Takumi, whose heart he had just slaughtered. At the edge of the platform, Aoi Sena embraced her father's head, which she herself had decapitated, and then squatted upon the tracks. Her chest dyed crimson in her father's blood. She laughed. Drool hung slackly from her mouth. Her eyes were unfocused. His mood having sobered, Suwa gave her a glance. "That girl's done for," he muttered inwardly. Whatever the case, he was through with her, and he didn't detect much of a need to kill her. Out of the gigalomaniacs who had been gathered in Tokyo as part of the Project Noah, there remained 2 whose code samples had yet to be taken. Excluding Kusunoki Yua, since she was an irregularity, and no one had conceived of her being a gigalomaniac, that left Nichijou Takumi and Orihara Kozoe. It must surely have been to the guidance of the Divine Light that here and now, these 2 had come tumbling into Suwa's hands. Suwa was grateful to heaven and the great founder for how his deeds were thus proven to have been perfectly in the right. Upon walking up to Takumi, he dropped to his knees, grabbed the slumping Takumi's upper arms, and attempted to drag him upright. But Takumi had gone totally limp, rendering him incapable of standing. His heart had died utterly. Serves him right, Suwa thought with a snort. They began walking off, dragging Takumi by the arm. Kozupi is shouting something, like she's suffering, like it hurts her, like she's having fun. I blinked my eyes. Where's Kozupi? She's fixed to a weird piece of art. Rimi's at her feet, all tied up. Something strange about Kozupi. Her clothes are torn to pieces, all creepy crawling. Creepy crawling. What is her skin? Her thick skin is. Look on her cheeks, on her neck, on her arms. Or on her belly button, on her thighs. Creepy crawling, groping and groping. Lots of somethings are wiggling under Kosapi's skin. Not just 1, 10, 20, around 30? They must be parasites, gross little caterpillars. Kosapi flails her head around, shake, shake. Her eyes are crazy, she's drooling, slobber, slobber. Her face looks really stupid, it's kind of entertaining, and she's wearing something on her head. Lots of cords sticking out of it, like a toy. Like a transform us into anything set.
楽しいことでもあったのですか、西条匠。
Hey! How could you possibly be falling asleep? An old guy who I've never seen before. Who?
なるほど。無意識に折原梢と妄想をシンクロさせているのですか。随分と物好きですね。そんなに焦らずとも、彼女の次は君にたっぷりとあの拷問を受けさせてあげます。
Wake yourself up. Come on. Move your arms. Stretch. I'm next? No way. I'm next? No way. I'm next? No way. I don't want suffering. I don't want pain.
タク、あなたなら、今なら、止められる。あなたなら。
My wrist should have been bound behind my back, but as if it had all been a will of its own, the cord loosened and fell away. Tied up, lying there, Remy turned her gaze alone in my direction. Her eyes were pleading with me. The vast machinery letting out an eerie hum, residing in state at the center of this dome-shaped space. This was Noah to itself. She was urging me to shatter it. Remy's eyes pleaded with me. A tall, intellectual-looking man, Norose, had his back turned to me, and he was watching Kosapi being tortured with a businesslike look on his face. He hadn't noticed my movements. There were no other people around, not even Sua. I could do it now. The only one who could do it was me. I was scared. What if Norose caught me in the act? What if I failed? I trembled when I thought about it. There was something wrong with this game, entrusting the fate of the world to the likes of me. But I had to do it. I found myself able to make up my mind about it unexpectedly fast. Maybe I'd grown stronger. That's right, I'm strong. I'm strong! I stood up slowly. Norose still hadn't noticed. Stop hitting me!
I'm sorry, the game is freaking boring!
Well, wake yourself up!
It's boring, Robert!
How is it possibly boring? He was kind of dumb for being the last boss. Was it so much fun to watch Kosapi suffer? It disgusted me. I gritted my teeth. Come forth, D-Sword. Ripples appeared in the air. In a blue light, I took a hold of it. I felt it. Neither cold nor hot, neither hard nor soft. I drew it out of the direct sea. A long, long sword settled in my hand.
Nani?
Nani? Now he noticed, albeit too late. I rebooted my D-Sword. I sent particles flying into the dead spots of everyone here. It didn't require any concentration. It didn't matter how it operated. All I had to do was imagine it. I gripped the hilt of my D-Sword in both hands. Its glow transformed from blue to red. Norose looked at me with disbelief written on his countenance. He was recoiling. I'd won. I grinned. Raised my sword, and had the delusion that this is a sword of light. It possessed amazing powers like the ability to slice the air. If I realized its full potential and swung it all the way, it could turn anything in the world to dust. I couldn't come up with a name for my special move right off the bat, so I gave up on shouting an attack name like in a shonen manga. I took the power I'd stocked up in my D-Sword by means of a delusion, and I unleashed all of it at Noah too. 2 months later,
Wait, what?
the winter sky wasn't very blue. In exchange, unlike the skies of summer, it had a cool and clear feeling to it. Morning. I'd opened my eyes to the sound of an alarm clock, and I looked up at the sky as I brushed my teeth. 2 months since that tumult. Shibuya was still in the midst of reconstruction. As the new year has passed, Shibuya had begun recovering its previous bustle and gaudiness, little by little. A voice called me. When I looked over, Rimi was coming up the stairs. It was the first time I'd seen her in her uniform since that day. Rimi smiled at me and whipped a salute.
ビシおはよう。朝ごはん急いで作るね。
She held a convenience store bag. Inside were white bread, eggs, and milk. Standing before the sink, she cheerfully began her preparations. These past 2 months, Rimi had practically been coming to my base on a daily basis, and she cooked for me every time. Apparently she herself had never done any real cooking before, so it doubled as practice for her. I wanted to tell her not to turn me into a guinea pig, but it made me happy to be able to eat a girl's home cooking. So in the end, I just bit the bullet.
And the
今
hard
日から
eggs.
学校再開だね。
Tsume Academy had been closed ever since the earthquake, but today it was reopening. I was going to seize this as my chance to stop my half-hikokomori lifestyle and start seriously attending school.
タクトまた学校に通えるなんて嬉しいな。
Rimi said as she cracked an egg. As you might expect, it's impossible for us to tolerate the cold and eat outside smack dab in the middle of winter. Carrying inside the 2 servings worth of toast and scrambled eggs Rimi had made, we laid them on a low table, then we sat side by side on the sofa. Dude, this is the cleanest his room has ever been. Look at it.
It looks the exact same.
No, dude, like there's no sodas on the floor, there's no manga on the couch. It's
Everything's
like tidy
in
on the
FedEx
table.
boxes.
I mean, aside from his bed, the room is as tidy as it's ever been. Carrying inside the 2 servings
Question.
worth of,
Is this actually happening or is this a delusion?
carrying inside the 2 servings worth of toast and scrambled
Just
eggs Rimi had
answer.
made, we laid them on a low table. Then we sat side by side on the sofa.
じゃあいただきます。
Itadakimasu.
いただきます。
That is not the proper translation for that.
After putting her hand,
Itadakimasu has no actual translation.
it's usually let's eat.
Databayo. No. Is it Databayo?
Almost every time I see Itadakimasu attempted to be translated, it's basically let's eat.
It's a thanks for your food, but it technically doesn't have a translation.
It's just something you say when you're about to eat, or when you're receiving food and you're about to eat it. You know, it's just. After putting my hands together, I reached for the butter placed at the edge of the table. However, Rimi had done the same thing almost simultaneously, and our fingertips brushed up the container of the butter.
So cute.
What a classic love comedy development. Though I smiled wryly at it in my head, my eyes soon met Rimi's, where she sat close beside me, and my heart started pounding. Rimi didn't take her eyes away from me either, nor did she pull back her hand. Both of us having gone rigid, we gazed at each other with our fingers still touching. Rimi entwined her fingers with my hand.
Wake up.
She closed her eyes softly and raised her face toward me a little. I found myself naturally holding Rimi's hand in return. As I neared her
朝
lips,
から何イチャついてんの？
あ
flustered, I sprang away from Rimi. When I looked at the door, Nanami had appeared there without my noticing, arms folded and an exasperated look on her face.
ななちゃん、おはよう。
ナナミ
There are 2 things
心臓に悪い
missing
こと
from
す
your
る
hand
なよ。
right now, kid. Your bongo is gone,
お
and you
兄
should
と
have
リミさんって
stitches
ほんと仲いいね。
or a scar.
焼けちゃうな。
At least a scar.
ねえねえ、実際のところどこまで行ったの？
This is a delusion. This is not real.
どこまでって？
As
また
really
また
depressing.
とぼけてないで
Hello,
教え
third
てよ、
person
リ
to join
ミ
us
さ
in
ん。
the chat.
Apparently, Nanami had settled on Rimi as her target. Barging into the room, she dragged over my computer chair and sat in front of Rimi.
キスは当然したとして、その先は？ちょっとからかわないでよ。 いいじゃん、教えて。教えない。じゃあ鬼、教えてよ。どこまで行ったか。
Forget about telling or not telling. We haven't so much as kissed yet. Ah, I'm such an idiot. I've had so many chances before now. At this rate, it felt like I'd probably never graduate from being a virgin. Ah, depressed by my own uselessness, I took a gulp of milk.
リミさんがのんびりしてるなら、ナナが鬼を奪っちゃうかな。
No.
No.
No. I pulled a ginormous spit take.
鬼、きったな。
お前。
冗談だよ。本気にされても困っちゃうってば。
Issuematic. Try not to surprise me so much. The three of us headed for school side by side. Remy was humming that Phantasm song again. Passing through Shutu Park, we took my usual shortcut. You could see some faint traces of the earthquake in the park, such as how a part of the stone wall around the pond remained crumbled. Even so, it was far better off compared to the wretched state of the heart of Shibuya.
おはようございます。
おはようございます。
Yu was sitting on my bench. Turning back in our direction, she put on a soft smile and lowered her head.
西条くん、昨日はとても楽しかったです。昨日？
ユアと一緒に秋葉原まで買い物に行ったんだ。
あ、わかった。お人形さんでしょ。
フィギュアと言えよ。
It was true that we gone to buy figures.
新しいセイラちゃん。早速部屋に飾りました。私も行きたかったな。
リミってフィギュアに興味あるの？
When I asked her, she turned a bit bashful.
っていうか、タクの好きなもの、私も好きになりたいし。わあ、大胆発言。だったら、
We already got the knee-high
一
socks.
緒に買いに行きましょう。
Thigh-high, sorry.
本当？
Those are definitely thigh high.
ありがとうございます。
You and Remy had totally hit it off. Look at all these generic background people. Like 3D models and everything.
Thigh-highs, long skirt.
You and Nanami were in different wings of the school, so we parted at the entrance. As I switched to my indoor shoes, somebody blew into my ear from behind me. Goosebumps sprang up on me with a shiver, and I leapt back as I turned around.
I knew it!
There stood Ayase, wearing a close-lipped smile.
おはよう、タクミ。
あ、おはよ
おはよう、あやちゃん。あやちゃん。
She's blushing.
Ayase abruptly tilted her head at what Remy had called her.
初めて
That's
よ。
so cute.
そんな呼び方をされたのは悪くないわ。でしょ？ファンタズムのライブがあるの。あさって。
She changed the subject out of the blue. As usual, Ayase was hard to get a
よか
handle
ったら
on.
来て。
う。僕に言ってるの？
See, now, had the rest of the game been like this, I probably could have been a lot more interested.
タクミに言ってるのよ。
Because he's outgoing, interacting with the characters, instead of just shutting everybody up. Yes,
What?
he's still just following along with the story, which is probably the part that's boring the most of me,
Life sucks, man.
それ
because it's
と
not actually happening.
リミ。あ、本当？絶対行くね。
I know, it's not actually happening.
Phantasm had disbanded once, but word had it that once the new year came around, they had undergone a rapid revival. I didn't know what kind of change of heart in her had brought it about, but I wanted to hear Ayase's songs one more time.
でも、タクミは渡さないわ。
Though I didn't know why she tacked on the butt, Ayase reached out and lightly caressed my cheek, as if to put Remy back in her place.
じゃあね、タクミ。
Yeah, man.
She smiled alluringly and climbed the stairs ahead of us. Dazed, I watched her leave without any idea of what was going on.
たく、鼻の下伸びてる。
Every day. Every day.
I hastily put a hand in my mouth.
冗談。
Put it to the wrong, you know.
When we arrived outside her classroom,
Hey, it's Kazupi.
Kazupi came charging down the hallway, smiling from ear to ear.
And she tripped.
But she collided with a boy coming out of the classroom and landed hard on her butt. Teary-eyed, she apologized to him, then finally managed to come up to us.
おはようさんさんなの。
Hey, she's talking out loud.
怪我はない。
That didn't happen on this
廊下を
playthrough.
走っちゃダメだよ、コズ
It
ピ
happened
ー。
once.
What?
It happened once.
No?
It did.
No?
Not on this play. I mean, on the previous one.
That's what I said, not on this playthrough.
あにゃ
Yeah?
She's so adorable. Kazupi began fidgeting, then she peered up at my face from below.
たくみさんに早く教えたかったのら。
教えるって何を？
ほんとね、ほら。
Kazupi pointed in the direction she'd just come running from. Oh god, she's about to punch me, isn't she? When I looked more closely, Senna was standing there, leaning against the wall. Ah, girl B, my favorite. Her arms were folded and she had a rather sour expression pasted on her face.
セナさん、退院したんだ。
Senna had been hospitalized throughout these past 2 months. The psychological assault that Sue had inflicted on her had kept dragging at her the whole time. Oh yeah, she did kind of kill her father. Senna raised her face and began slowly walking towards us. She was as scary as ever. Although she wasn't doing anything, she bore a certain aura about her. Like she might slap someone across the face any minute now. Wonder where you get that impression from. Would it be the hand that looks like she's about to backhand you? I've been going to visit Senna in the hospital twice a week, but no matter how much I tried to start a conversation with her, in the end she hadn't listened to a word I said. It had been almost torturously awkward. Maybe she really disliked me. I didn't get along well with Senna. A sense of tension stretched tautly between
You're
us.
gonna get a finger broken.
Rather, I was just getting unilaterally
というわ
terrified.
けで、今日は学校が終わったら退院のお祝いをしようしよ
Kazupi was the only one acting all excited. I kind of felt like with this atmosphere, it'd be a pretty crappy party.
う。おい、西条。
That was when Senna finally opened her mouth. I cringed. I couldn't meet her eyes. Senna held something out to me. It was a small stick with "Winner" written on it.
あ、ガルガリ君の当たり棒なのら。
Perplexed, I accepted it. Senna soon whipped her head away, looking off to the side.
お前に言いたいことがある。
なんでしょう。
Those eyes to those eyes.
It must have been a figment of my imagination that Senna's cheeks somehow appeared to be blushing pink, right?
お前のことが好きだ。
え？
Her abrupt confession left not just me, but also Rimi and Kazupi staring blankly. Shocked.
Yeah, Rimi's shocked. Kuzupi's just like, oh good, you finally said it. What about it?
For a second, I thought she was teasing me, but Senna wasn't the type to crack the kind of joke. Which meant, are you serious?
何度もお見
This
舞いに
must
来
have been
て
your first, your happiest part of the game when you first played it, huh?
No, my first playthrough, I was all over Fest.
Really?
言わせるな、このバカ。
Why do you give me so much crap about the fact that I was all over?
Because she's
Fest?
crazy.
So?
She'd gone all dairy and then back to Sin mode. Totally off her own accord. Totally of her own accord. No, but even if she'd said that to me all of a sudden. A beat too late, Rimi cried out in surprise. Kozupi, perhaps still uncomprehending, had her eyes as wide as saucers.
なんだ先ほど異論があるのか。ありまくりだよ。そんなとにかくダメだって。
Rumi and Kozapi were wildly confused, but the most bewildered of all of them was me. To think she'd make such a proclamation to me. Without any idea of how to react, I looked up at the clear sky beyond the window. Somehow, right at the start of the semester, this turned into quite a noisy day, huh? Will this peaceful time, full of promise and fun, continue like this every day from now on? I sure wanted to continue. I wished for it at the bottom of my heart. Suddenly, I looked at the reflection of my face in the window. The reflection there wasn't me. It was a wrinkly, all color, all light went away. Alright. That's Rumi. I was hugging my knees in a pitch black space. Before me was a sole light source in the space. It's like a monitor, like a window, like a picture frame. Inside it, Rimi, Senna, Kozapi were chatting about something, looking as though they were enjoying themselves. I couldn't hear their voices. As I watched it, my emotions like absolutely still, or else my heart was dead. Then I realized I'd been watching my delusions, 2D world into which I'd fled, a perfect illusion. Since when had it been a delusion?
最初からですよ。
I looked behind me. Norase stood there, but it was dark, and all I could see were his feet.
諏訪君に心を殺されたではありませんか。
I had been in delusion ever since then, the whole time.
君のコードサンプルは採取できました。もう用済みですから、いつでも塵に帰ってもらって結構です。
Nice loafers, dork.
あ
I felt nothing because my heart was dead. I should have felt nothing. Yet a single tear streaked down my cheek. At the very end, I'd gone back to being a loser. I'd run away from the harshness of reality.
最後に幸せな夢を見られてよかったですね。
When you got down to it, I'd been a worthless human being. Sorry, Rimi. Sorry, Chris. I apologize, but I didn't really get why I had to apologize anymore. Nor did I feel any guilt. Sorry, Rimi. Sorry, you. You know, he's apologizing to you for being such a loser. He wishes he could be that cute that slice of life protagonist with where all the girls love him, and he's just interacting with all of them.
I don't really care if all the girls love him.
And he's like,
being
you
a
know,
prick.
he's like visiting Senna in the hospital twice a week, and he's going out with you to check out the stores.
Hey,
he's hanging out and he's friends with, you know, you want him to be that person. That's just not who he is, unfortunately. I decided to return to the continuation of my delusion from before. Someone would probably be nice enough to kill me sooner or later. So until then, I wanted to wallow in the happiness of the world I'd fled to.
Hey, we're back to the scene again.
Since when did it start raining? Maybe the rain had been brought into by Noah too. The gaze falls from the sky. The stare pierces through the rain clouds, coated in pitch black.
So in this playthrough, Noah was not destroyed.
It pours down at me like the rain. The bad guy won. He's done for. I whisper in my heart to the owner of the gaze. I don't feel the chill of the rain. In fact, the droplets on my cheeks seem almost warm. It's the first time I've thought of rain as being warm. Perhaps it's because the dome housing Noah 2 had been enveloped in air cold enough to freeze me.
And now the dome's destroyed.
Reflected in my eyes is a shattered city. Reflected in my eyes is despair. Reflected in my eyes is death. Reflected in my eyes is nothingness. No one is here. No one moves. No one lives. The only thing audible is the sound of the rain continuing to fall. Noah's Ark has already been set into motion. We were unable to stop it. The future holds only despair. If everything remains this way, anything alive and anything dead, will it all be gently enveloped and washed away? I too hear him murmur this in his heart. Such a beautiful heart. I walk over to him, lying limp in the rubble.
Was this from Remy's perspective?
It's my fault he's ended up like this. If I handled things better, he wouldn't have needed to become involved. Guilt torments me. I blame myself. Forgive me. I'll lay you to rest now, so... His manner of birth was all too sad. And so too would be his manner of death. The one whose heart was so timid, fragile as glass, and so pure it shattered into pieces. I didn't want him to suffer, at least at the end of all this. Lying there, he looks up at me with empty eyes. I push aside my emotions. Despite seeing him, I look away to keep myself from weeping. If you and I are the only ones in the world, if we continue gazing solely at each other like this for the rest of eternity, would my world be reduced to what your eyes reflect? Would your world be reduced to what my eyes reflect?
These two think awfully alike, huh?
You are what's reflected in my eyes. I am what's reflected in yours. Viewing it that way instantly reduces the size of the world. At least, in the time you have left, I'll become your world. Whether it's a painful world, a difficult world, or even a sorrowful world, I'll make it so you no longer have to see it all. Resolving myself, I speak. Hanging my head, I spread my arms apart. Like aiming to fly above the rain clouds. Like catching all of the rain.
あなたを見つめる妄想。殺してあげる。
The feathers of light dance wildly. Like a gift from the sky for his funeral. I slowly kneeled down to where he lay. I'll cry if I see your eyes now. I'm sorry for not facing you. I softly embraced his head. His body is empty of tension. It's as if he's prepared for death.
辛いよね。ごめん。ごめんね。今、楽にしてあげるからね。
His demeanor tells me it isn't merely conceit on my part. He wore a very peaceful smile.
That smile is so sad.
Even though I've held it in all this time. My tears blur my vision. Because I didn't want him to see those tears. Because he had finally attained peace. I didn't want to worry him any further. I kissed him on the lips. A cold and dry sensation, seeming more and more sorrowful. But his trembling stops at my kiss. I cherish how my warmth has been of some use to him. Because he'll still see my tearful face if my lips leave his. Because I'll want to kiss him again if my lips leave his. Because if my lips leave his, I'll become selfish and I won't be able to kill him. I remain like that, plunging my D-sword into his chest. The sensation of it tearing through the skin of his chest, boring into his flesh, threading between his bones, steadily sinking its way into his body. All of it passes through the sword and into my hands. I'm so sorry. You can sleep as long as you want to now. Farewell. The sky continues to pour rain. It isn't blue. Not a speck of azure anywhere. Even if I wish for it, I can no longer see it. Is the sky blurring because of the rain? Because of my tears? As I hold up his body, as it gradually dissolves, enveloped in particles of light, I stretch my hand toward the sky. Somebody, tell me, where might that sky of ours have gone?
つの種人にきれい 信じた果てに閉ざされた絆どこで間違えた
Such a good pick for the song to play at the end of this.
砕けた
What?
傷つ
I said such a good song to pick to play at the end of this.
つけてもっと深い
It really fits the mood of the moment.
悲しいキスも
Damn it. One thing I hate about my desk is the fucking cord gets stuck on the edges all freaking time.
Yeah, Chaos Jaw does this one moment that just had me crying for like 20-30 minutes.
おしまいにしてあげるよ
So obviously, no, I absolutely hate that ending.
I don't think you're supposed to like it. It's supposed to just give a different perspective.
Well, I could have gone my entire life without ever seeing it. I would
You know,
have
it's,
just fine.
it's a bad ending. It's the bad guys win, and you know, it's just absolutely hopeless for the good people.
Obviously, the most preferred one is where he actually, you know, fucking grows a pair. It's over the fact that he was-
Delusion synchronization.
Yeah, where he fucking grows up. You know, and I'm not one of those people where, oh, I need to find out what every ending of the game is. Do I know the game? No, I don't.
Well, considering Chaos Child has like 6 or 7 endings, and really, all but maybe one of them are really worth watching. You'd be in the game for a long haul if you played that one, and you really don't want to play that one. So, but I really like it because I love this game.
I'm gonna say it's gonna depend on. There's 2 things I can say about it. One, science fiction.
Okay, I'm fine
So
with
I'd be
that.
playing science fiction.
Play some My Darling Embrace after it.
I'd be playing Steins Gate first. Because I cannot get through Steins Gate, which I like the story of.
It's boring.
Then I probably will not continue.
You're probably going to be bored out of your mind out of it too, because it's, you know, it's just like the, you know, it's better by a good margin.
Well, the problem is, I think it's this story, this format. I'm not good at reading books.
Right, which is why I'm not sure you're going to actually be able to sit through Steins Gate either.
Now, if there is an English version where they talk in English, I might be able to do it better. But just having to read everything, I just can't do. We should hopefully have all of these.
Nope.
No, we're
1,
missing
2,
some.
3, 4,
I want to.
5.
How am I missing that one?
Well, this is for getting all the CGs. This one is her without the glasses on, I'm pretty sure.
Well, and that's probably also her without the glasses on. Then.
This one is Remy looking all disturbed, like desiccated. This one's probably her with glasses. This one is, I don't know.
What's library data B?
These are backgrounds.
Oh. Like something you could take a picture and make your background.
No, they're just, you know, they're like background photos. They're things that aren't directly taking a picture of really anything. They're just environments and stuff.
Well, So on that note,
Chaos Head is done.
Chaos Head is finally done. I don't have to ever play this game again, and I probably never will.
So we would have got another almost 2 hours. So I think it's worth stopping when we did last week.
I will note I need to take a short break before I continue on for the night. It's probably about 20-ish minutes or so.
I'll be heading
Possibly
to
a
bed.
little bit longer. You can go to bed. I don't know what I'm going to play yet, so give me a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and take a break, and I will be back. Thank you. We're back. Don't know what I'm gonna play. So I'm gonna lock myself in sitting. Okay. I think I'm gonna play. Killing anything. Okay. So let's do this. Let's do some. Do some Fortnite. At least for a little bit, maybe an hour or so, maybe two. And go from there. This is a go-to for me because then I can, until somebody starts talking, I can kind of distract, do two things at once. I'll watch some.